everything you need to start your morning. This is Good Day Tampa Bay.
Well, many states have come under fire for their laws requiring voters to show a photo ID before being allowed to vote. Democrats and Republicans have battled it out in the court of public opinion and also in the courtroom. But what's the real story behind these voter ID laws? Felix Vega woke up early this morning and decided to come in and join us.
Very gladly.
To try to help us sort it out. We appreciate that.
No problem, Doug.
What is the real issue? I mean, obviously, if anybody's paying attention, they've heard about this. You know, do you have to show an ID? Don't you have to show an ID? Now, here in Florida, I know when I vote, I have to show some sort of identification, right?
We do. And the real debate comes down to is why these laws were passed to begin with. A lot of it comes down to those that are proponents of the laws say it prevents fraud. But the flip side of the debate is that this disenfranchisement argument, what are the groups that are targeted, the people that don't have IDs or some sort of state-issued ID? And that's where we really get into the heart of the debate. If you take a look at the list of people that are affected by these voting laws, you look at registered voters in these states that have passed some sort of law, but also we talk about college students that may be affected, the elderly, minorities, people that may not have some sort of state-issued ID. For the elderly example, they may not drive anymore. College students, you go to school in another state, you don't go necessarily to DMV and get an ID, you have your college ID. So that's where these laws are affecting people, and that's where the argument breaks down as far as who is going to be able to vote on election day as opposed to other states that don't have some sort of relaxed law like Florida does.
And the argument on the other side is, look, we have to show an ID to do anything, to get on a plane. Virtually, I mean, there's not a national ID card, which some say may be coming, but you have to have an ID to do a lot of things. Why not have an ID to vote?
And that was interesting because that was the argument in Pennsylvania for having their law in place. The judge in the lower court in Pennsylvania said, well, we use ID for everything in our daily lives. And so, but here in Florida, for example, when you go to the polls and you vote, you can use anything from your registration card, you got your student ID, your debit card, your driver's license, even your passport, pretty much anything, you know, as long as you have some sort of signature on it, because Florida is a signature matching state. So when you show up at the polls, they have your signature on file, you sign, present ID, and you're able to vote, and you're not disenfranchised or prevented from voting because you don't have one type of ID.
I don't know how they match my signature. It's such a scribble. You know?
Yeah, mine's all over the place too.
Well, how are these things getting challenged in the court? We know the fight in the court of public opinion. What about in the court?
There's two ways that this happens. For example, when a state passes one of these voter ID laws, it actually has to go through a pre-clearance process with the Department of Justice and the Attorney General. They review it, and if there's any voting restrictions under the Voting Rights Act, they say, okay, this is too restrictive, you got to go back and rewrite this, or they're going to reject it. Then at that point, either it's rejected or approved, both sides then go to court and say, well, we want the courts to decide whether or not this is constitutional. That's when it gets into the court battles, it goes through the court system, and eventually ends up in the Supreme Court of the states affected. We saw that in Pennsylvania this week.
Well, we know that Florida played a big part in the presidential election in 2000. Who could forget the hanging Chad? What do you see this issue? I mean, how big of an issue will this become in our state and around the country, this ID issue after the elections or during the elections?
This is interesting because you look at the swing states, because we have Florida, for example, is a big swing state, but also some of the other states, for example, Wisconsin, Nevada, North Carolina, California is very delegate rich. Pennsylvania is going to be the wild card, but Wisconsin and North Carolina, their voter ID laws have already been ruled unconstitutional. So they're back to the regular rules that they've had all along, which was not requiring some sort of photo ID. Nevada, another swing state, no photo ID law there as well. Pennsylvania is the big wild card because that's where this big lawsuit blew up this week, where the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania said to the lower court, you need to go back and look at this voter ID law again. We're not going to rule on it, which a lot of people had hoped that they would say it's unconstitutional. And what happened in Pennsylvania is that there was two sides to the debate. Pennsylvania was saying that there's only going to be 89,000 people that are affected because it comes down to registered voters versus possible voters. 89,000 people are registered to vote that didn't have the proper ID. The ACLU and some of the other groups saying there's going to be this pool of 700, 800,000 people. Well, if they want to register to vote, they've only got 13 days to do it. The registered voters are the ones that count when they go to the ballot box.
Well, this certainly will not be the last word on this.
Absolutely not.
We may be coming, talking to you as the election comes closer.
Definitely.
And perhaps after. Okay, well, thanks for being with us.
No problem, Doug.
Appreciate it. Let's check in now with Lindsay for a look at your Sunday forecast. Hey there, Lindsay.
Hey, good morning. Great.